Hey YouTube. So this video is going to be on a little bit about DMT before I do my series on the extractions and all of that. But first I wanted to say, I've posted so many videos on DMT that I've recorded and I posted and I pulled down instantly. It's because this subject, it's a very tricky subject. It's so many different facets are actually attached to DMT that you would never even think of. And the problem is no scientist really wants to come out and really step into this subject because A, you're not allowed to talk about it in school. B, it goes against how we typically like to view things. And I'm going to go into some detail on some of this stuff real quick. It's this. Most people who came to DMT that, they're young, they've taken hallucinogens, they've done drugs, they've heard about it, and so they want to try it. But the thing is that, for instance, myself, I stumbled upon DMT after a quest for knowledge for over 14 years where I read everything I could get my hands on of early mythologies of every religion from thousands of years ago, from every continent, and eventually you start seeing at the beginning it all leads in the same direction, it all points to the same source. And what unfortunately, what used to be the end all of alchemy or the quest for knowledge is now the way that information is so readily available and abundant, it gets out there, fragments of it. So kind of the best way to explain this is, imagine you have a book and you read, you have a book and you read the very last page of the book and you read, the who murdered who or the entire outcome. But just because you read the last page doesn't mean you understand the actual book itself. So what's happening is people are getting the last page of such a sacred knowledge that wasn't really offered for everybody, because not every being is ready for, or even close to ready for this, because you have to understand what you're playing with before you play with it. Because if you play with it and it happens, well, it's going to destroy everything you've ever been taught in this world. Every book is going to become a lie. Everything that your parents and anyone else has ever taught you will be shredded in seconds on this chemical. And so that's how it's not helping people really gather information, or where you, Alex Gray says it the best in the spirit molecule, when you go to these places, well, if you can't bring tangible stuff back from it, then what good is it to go there? But you really can bring substantial, tangible stuff back to help mankind at this current time. But the problem is that it is such a sacred knowledge. And for instance, let's look at Pythagoras. First Pythagoras, Aristotle, Galileo, Da Vinci, Newton, Copernicus. The list just goes on and on and on, who all studied alchemy. And alchemy was never about turning lead into gold. It's about the transformation of yourself, of going to a higher conscious state of being, and how the universe and stuff around you exist, really the laws of the universe, how the invisible can become visible, how things that aren't present are present, how the transformation of your consciousness, of your thoughts. And so, like for instance, Pythagorean had to wait 20 years to go into Pharaohism school. And the reason why I bring up Pharaohism is because our mentality of our ancestors is so far off that we now think that we're the most intellectual, creative beings of all time at this present state. We are the holy of all, beings. We're so ideological and arrogant, and assume that nobody could ever have known more knowledge than us than at this present moment, which is absolutely wrong. I mean, they tell us how many particles are matter. But one of their temples is called the Temple of Luxor, which is we call the Temple of Man. It took 500 years to build. Now remember, America is not even 300 years old. And this temple took 500. And the temple is to 7 vital parts of the human body. And each part of the temple goes into the exact fundamental role for that organ, and how it affects every other part of the body, literally in such detail. R.R. Swallow studied it for 40 years. He was a multiple PhD, mathematician, alchemist. And the temple tells us how many particles are matter. It tells us what part of our brain fires what part. But anyway, the center part, in his book called The Temple of Man, he literally brings up the pineal. They have columns, which is the brain, and each column has tons and tons of symbols. And each symbol, therefore, you go find that symbol in the other part of the temple, and it tells us, what part of the brain corresponds to what part of the body and things like that. But he brings up the pineal gland in his book. Now, he didn't bring it up with DMT or anything, but he brings up the pineal. It's very interesting that the temple was built around. And then you have to start to look into mummification and why they went through the nose and pull out that gland, and so you're opening up Pandora's box of information. But the problem is then you read everyone's personal journals from like Newton, and his personal journals say, do never let this be published, or never let this get out to mankind, because there's not ready. And it isn't a bad thing. It's not an insult to anybody. It's the fact that those that have taken DMT understand that everything gets shredded around you. And the problem is when you come back is you're told what never happened, or it was your imagination, or because we've lost such an amazing knowledge of what we're really playing with. And that's what our ancestors tell us, and that's if you study the right stuff for endless times, you'll come up with it. I mean, alchemy is more than transformation of gold, and it leads into some of this exact stuff. So then the problem is let's just pretend that you're very close to the end source of the knowledge. It's not your right to give it to people, because what you find is so unbelievable, amazing, or how to gather knowledge that can help society, but the same knowledge can be taken the wrong way into hurt. So it becomes this moral dilemma. Do you help people and speak of it, and then is it your right to, because you're going to be ridiculed by all your peers in the scientific community and everybody around you, or do you let people just do what they're going to do and get hurt, because that's what's happening.